Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the censorship, or the level and degree of censorship today across not only the mainstream news, but across all social media, and the very open now conspiracy, and it's all out in the open, the conspiracy between the globalist controlled organs of government and the social media platforms in censoring any opinions, views, voices, or attitudes that are not acceptable or deemed acceptable by the globalist project. Now, bear in mind, the globalists are attempting to reshape the Western world into a status and situation suitable to their aims and goals and objectives, and they're pursuing that with great vigor. And of course, controlling the media messaging is very much a central part of that. But the leftist activists frequently say, well, the high point of, or the epitome of, or the most egregious example of censorship and the illegal methods used to achieve that censorship were what's called the McCarthy era, McCarthyism. And so let's just compare the two and have a look at the backstory and see where we go. Now, before getting there, my sort of position is that the McCarthy era has nothing on today. There were no government level conspiracies to anywhere near the extent that we see today, which the Twitter files have brought right out into the open. Something already knew, but it's now being confirmed as hard, undeniable fact. So I came back to, I'll do the backstory of McCarthy. Now, McCarthy was the junior senator from Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin in the United States. And I think he came to office in 1947, and he died in 1957. So he was in office as a senator there for 10 years. Now, 1947 was, even though Russia and Britain and the United States had been allies in World War II, they'd been ideologically, very far apart. The brutal, murderous communist regime of the Soviet Union, with Joseph Stalin, the arch sort of murderer of him and Mao Zedong, the arch murderers of the 20th century. Stalin ran a particularly brutish form of communism, but while they're allies, they quickly fell out. Once the war ended, their common objective of defeating Hitler, once that was gone, they stopped being friendly. And there's a few reasons for that. The Soviets, the Red Army, had invaded much of Eastern Europe and even part of Germany, for that matter. And so Stalin appointed or put in puppet regimes into those Eastern European areas. Now, where, this is places like Poland and Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. So they nearly got Denmark and Greece. In fact, Churchill was so worried about Greece falling to the communists that as Red Army troops were coming in through Bulgaria and Romania, Churchill sent 30,000 British troops to go to the border, the Greek border there, northern border, to make sure the Red Army didn't get into Greece and install a puppet government there. Similarly, by the way, in Denmark, the British troops were supposedly going to advance just to the southern portion of where Germany and Denmark have a border. But Churchill ordered the British troops to advance to the city of Lübeck, which is on the eastern side of the Danish-German border, and thus preventing the Red Army from entering Denmark and installing a puppet government there. Now, where there were elections, and the West was insisting, Britain and America were insisting on elections in some of these countries, the Soviets sent in agitators and to stir up all sorts of trouble, disrupt the election, corrupt the, make sure that votes in favour of a certain party would magically disappear, and the vote counting was tampered with, all to make sure that the Communist Party got up and won, and then they then disallowed all the opposition. So once the communists took control, any alternative view was disallowed, and that's very much the communist way of doing things. An attitude, by the way, we're seeing from the globalists today, particularly whenever the government is not based in reality or the policies and so on of the government, but based in fantasy, ideological fantasy. And that's where you see, because once the ruling elite are relying on fantasy to have control or take control or keep control, then they can't allow any reality, which means they can't allow any alternative point of view to be getting around, because then people will realise the fantasy that's governing them. Now, even when you take away alternative points of view, that people still know, hold on a minute, that's crap. As they did, by the way, in the Soviet Union. Interestingly, after over 70 years of communism in the Soviet Russia, 2 out of every 3 people knew they were being lied to, and that these lies were again ideological fantasy and nothing else. So coming back to McCarthy now. So at the end of the war, the Russians, the Soviet Union, communist Russians, fell out with the British and the Americans. And but during the war, while they were allies, the Russians had seeded a lot of activists and propagandists and so on, which was sort of semi-tolerated by the American establishment and indeed the British establishment, because they were promoting an anti-fascist, anti-Hitler attitude. So as long as they kept that up, they were tolerated. But as soon as Hitler was gone, these activists that were all over the United States, particularly in the education sector, particularly in there, and a lot of the public services, like social services and that sort of thing, they were everywhere. They're the agitators, and they'd been placed there. Trade unions, the same thing. So that once the war was over, the communists then, Moscow then instructed, during the communist era, then instructed these agitators to switch their attitudes to being anti-capitalist, anti the American system, and their job was to stir up race division, gender division, and so on. And Betty Friedan, one of the prominent leading feminists, who described marriage as a caged hell for women. She was a editor of a Soviet newspaper, and her job was to spread agitation, stir up division and hatred and so on amongst the American people. That's what she was paid to do, and she was on the directly on the payroll of the of the Soviet communists. And if you look at all the those people of that era, they were all heavily steeped in Marxist ideology and so on. Now, as a further backdrop, the Great Depression had sort of been immediately before World War II. And in the eyes of many, not just communists, by the way, but others, in the eyes of many, capitalism had failed, because the Great Depression had 25+% unemployment and that sort of thing. And so the view was that if this sort of suffering was around amongst the American population, or indeed other Western populations, then capitalism quite clearly had failed, and therefore another alternative of how to manage a nation, how to manage an economy, was needed. Now, whether that be sort of the type of fascism, and there are 2 different types. The fascism of Mussolini and of Hitler were quite different, but also communism was entertained. Now, communism had a bigger sort of siren call to the masses, because and to these ideological intellectuals. I don't know if you can be an ideological intellectual, really, because intellectual is someone that can see opposing points of view and see their merits, whereas you couldn't say that of the Marxists. Nonetheless, we'll call them for that for the moment, the ideological vanguard, if you will, of the Marxist sort of movement. they saw, well, if we have whatever resources a society has, if we share it equally amongst ourselves, then we'll be far better off than with capitalism, where you may have somebody who's rich and someone who's poor. So it was perceived as being an equitable way. Everybody shares equally in all the resources. Now, there's some obvious fall downs there, because some people work hard, some people are brighter, some people are more capable, some people are more energetic, more applied, more motivated, whatever the case may be, than others. The communists try and gloss over that by saying, well, to be a good communist, you should be happy to produce lots more than everyone else, and that they share in it. So it's each to his ability, each to his means. So the idea of people with high ability should be working hard and sharing whatever they make equally with others, so they have no more than the other person does. And equally, someone who doesn't do any work and makes no contribution, or just turns up and goes through the motions but produces nothing, they're entitled to exactly the same amount as the person that works their ass off, and so on. So that's sort of one of the fall downs of communism, is that people after a while go, nah, why should I try hard? Why should I work hard? Why should I go out of my way when I don't get any more than anyone else? So everybody slows down to the absolute minimum and does as little as they possibly can. And to make up for that shortfall in productive output, the communists just lower the quality of everything, and just lower the expectations generally to satisfy this equal distribution concept. Anyway, these activists are all running around in the United States public service and again in education, and the communist activists, the Marxists, they always target education. That is always the first place they go for, and they look at homosexuals, lesbians, and Jewish people and black people as being the most likely to accept the Marxist message. Now, so there were a lot of these leftover activists who were now again sort of attacking capitalism, or trying to undermine capitalism through pushing policies that would lead to a weakening of, if you like, the capitalist structure. And at the time, America was by far and away the richest country in the world following World War II. Almost 50% of the world's wealth was contained in the United States. So, and that's a staggering sort of concentration of wealth, which eroded fairly quickly. Today it's like 20% or so. So it gives you an idea that the United States, on a relative basis, because the rest of the world has got richer, is less than half as wealthy it was in 1947. So McCarthy comes along, and Joseph McCarthy, the senator from Wisconsin. He comes along and starts calling out these communists. Now, whether or not you call them communists is another matter. And there were some hardcore agitator communists, some of which, by the way, he never mentioned, which is sort of a little surprising. But some of the ones that he went after were people who say they'd attended a communist meeting during the Great Depression, when a lot of people were very disillusioned with a lot of things, and these communist meetings where they say it was a soup kitchen where they were giving out free food to people and that sort of thing. So they attended one of these meetings or rallies or whatever you call them, and these meetings they were talking about giving food to the hungry and helping out people in distress and this sort of thing, and that the way to do that was to have a more equitable society. That was how it was sort of sold. So again, it's how the Marxists begin the dialogue. That's very much a Marxist pitch. That we're only trying to create equality. That's all. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with equality? Hey, we're trying to do something good. That's always how the Marxists begin the dialogue. And it all sounds good on the face of it. So people had attended that, and if you'd attended one or two of these soup kitchen type meetings, then and that was on record somewhere, then you could be caught up in this McCarthy era, where it's like the Red Scare. There are enemy agents around and so on. So Now, a lot of the people McCarthy named were agitators and were or had been under the employ of the Soviets and were agitating. So some of them were caught up on the margins, as again, they'd attended some sort of a food rally or something like that during the Depression, which is very unique to the times. And those people were caught up in the net sometimes as well. Now, if McCarthy sort of named them, and this is where I've got the problem with it, this is where we fail to learn the lessons of the past, when McCarthy would name these people with some sort of like parliamentary privilege where they couldn't sue him for slander or something like that, where he named these people, some of them who that they were agitators, they had been and had spread propaganda, but they were without trial or without anything like that. They were dismissed from their jobs. Not very many at the end of the day, but some did. Some even committed suicide because they knew their careers were absolutely ruined. This is particularly the case with academics. Now, most of the people, not all, but many, I wouldn't even say most, but a very substantial proportion of the people that the Soviets used as agitators were Jewish, gay, lesbian, and black. So McCarthy's antics have cut right to the core of the gay, lesbian, academic, activist, community. So for them, the fight isn't over. They're out for revenge, and they want revenge, and they see McCarthy as the straight white male. All straight white males are McCarthy. They're fascists. Now, the common pushback by the Soviet agitators, and indeed the Soviet magazines and newspapers at the time, was that McCarthy was a fascist. That straight away they go for that fascist straight away, and the finger pointing and the fascism, and he's a Nazi and that sort of thing. And that catch cry and that sort of paradigm of how you respond to somebody. So if you call out the gay, lesbian academic that's spreading gender division and transgender this and so on, so that, then don't even discuss the merits of it. Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. That's straight away the response, and it was then and is now, and that hasn't changed. So, but the problem I have with this, and this is where we don't learn the lessons of the past, whether these people were or were not communists or agitators or something, that's if you believe them to be so, then you bring charges, and treason or espionage, you bring charges against them, and the Justice Department pursues that. They're brought into an independent court of law in front of a judge and a jury. And then you produce your evidence, and if they're guilty, fine. And if not, they walk free with their careers and their lives and their reputations fully and absolutely intact. And this is where I think, in my view, McCarthyism fell down, and where that whole era is a black mark, similar in ways to the witch trials, which people did draw parallels. That Jewish playwright Arthur Miller, I'm jumping all over that one, but in The Crucible. Now. What we haven't learned is today people are still being dismissed, and banks are saying, no, we're not going to have a bank account here. The PayPals are saying, no, we're not collecting money for you, all because the allegation that the person has the wrong political views. They've committed no crime, or nothing's been proved in a court of law. Now, if they want to do those things, fine, then you take it to a court of law and you prove your case on the basis that somebody may have said something negative about you somewhere, or you don't like someone's point of view, or you don't like someone's attitude towards communism or anything else. Then the right to just unperson them and destroy their lives and their reputation, their jobs, and all that sort of stuff. No. What we learned during the McCarthy era is that is wrong. No matter who it is, doesn't matter if it's the most rabid communist in the whole universe ever. It's still wrong to do it until you've proved it in a court of law. Now, McCarthy did have senatorial hearings where people were summoned, but they were extrajudicial in the sense that people could be brought in and verbaled and threatened and accused and this sort of thing. Not that they weren't able to produce evidence, but it wasn't a court of law that could conclude at the end no, this person is not guilty of that. Or they did 15 years previously attended some sort of a food distribution gathering where there was or happened to be a Marxist speaker there but people would have listened and thought, okay, that's interesting, but I don't agree with that. That's still not a crime. So this idea that you can commit ideological crimes was really where the McCarthy thing went, and without proving actual crimes. And this was the big failing again of McCarthyism. But we've learned nothing. We've learned nothing from the past. And those same mistakes that the leftists scream from the rooftops as being an outrageous time and situation. But they only say that because their brethren are being accused. Brethren suffered under that. Now they're quite happy to turn the guns and the cannons and the ray guns and the laser beams onto everyone else. As long as I'm not getting it, it's fine. But the lesson to be learned is that you never allow something like that to happen again under any circumstances and for any reason. And if you think someone's guilty of a crime, you charge them and you bring them into an independent court of law and you produce your evidence. And if you can't produce the evidence to convict them, then they walk fucking free with their reputations fully and absolutely intact and their jobs and everything still in place. And the state, I believe, the state should be responsible for ensuring that. So if you want to discriminate against somebody because they have the wrong political views and say dismiss them from their job or someone, then the state will come after you for that. No, I don't think that's a good outcome, having the state running around doing those things. The state's active enough, chasing down people with the wrong views anyway. So you don't want the state to be a directly political actor in that sense, but to uphold justice. And when I say justice, as in the rule of law and due legal process. Now, due legal process is where this fell down. The rights, the basic rights to someone accused of being a communist were not intact. They were not upheld. And again, the lesson of the past is those must be upheld. And if McCarthy was forced, or anyone else for that matter, but if McCarthy was forced to uphold those rights, that due legal process, then he would have had to follow a particular set of rules, and he could have not have done that persecution stuff that he did. Whether he managed to target real communist agitators or not, he could not have done it the way he did it if he had to uphold the due legal process of a citizen who has committed no crime unless proven to have committed a crime in an independent court of law. And this is something, and our failure to learn the lessons of the past means we're revisiting the past, and I believe with tragic consequences. You've been a tacitist today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.